Oh, the beast in me is caged by parade.
All right, so today we will continue with Robert Moore's terrifying material. The thing that terrifies me the most is that the it wishes to be treated respectfully. That is something that feels to me exactly right. And when the it comes forward in the midst of these disentangled, chaotic racial connections and broken connections with Europe and various countries, we are nuts. And so we're not liable to treat the it with respect. Is that right, Robert? So,
I said I would open the frame to spiritual reflections on spiritual transformation. And let me just say this, that when you're speaking scientifically, you're using a certain very limited kind of language. I mean, you're seeking to base what you're saying on things that have a lot of empirical evidence of some kind, research evidence, clinical evidence, various evidence based on interdisciplinary research, but you're self-consciously trying to be aware that you're limiting what you're talking about to stuff that other folks can work with and see, verify, work with you on trying to tell based on evidence and so forth whether what you're talking, whether your theory of something is false or correct or false based on actual testing. In this discussion, we have to understand that when you begin speaking of spiritual things, you enter, just by virtue of when you begin speaking about spiritual things, you are already in the realm of the mythic imagination and the symbolic discourse. So in other words, the language we have to use about these things is language that's stretched language. And let me just share a couple of assumptions. You have to have to be using the mythic imagination and symbolic language in talking about spiritual things, but there are some things that I assume about this. I assume that all mythic and symbolic formulations are imperfect, all of them. Language is inadequate, really, to talk about spiritual things. I think you heard some of that in the songs. I mean, we've been singing. I mean, there's an acknowledgement that language is inadequate to do that. But we're humans. We try to talk about these things. And so I like to even say that all spiritual assertions are in some way idolatrous. All spiritual assertions are in some way idolatrous, because it's not possible for a human to speak things perfectly about divine things. And this is just some of the assumptions. If you think you can speak perfectly about divine things, that would be, in my view, an example of grandiosity. See? And so that is some of my fundamental assumptions. In other words, we come from a lot of different spiritual tribes here. And my assumption about any spiritual tribe's languaging of the things of the Spirit, they're all flawed and all limited. And my basic feeling is we should spend a lot more time asking how our own are flawed and limited rather than how someone else's are flawed and limited. And that's shadow work, we call that. that religious and tribal spiritual traditions find it very hard to do. So I'm just laying out some assumptions. But what I want to do fairly quickly is to just lay out for you what I believe to be 7 key elements of spiritual transformation. And I want to go through that fairly fast. And I will say this, and have to invite you to wear your spiritual reflection hats here. But from my point of view, when you move to spiritual reflection, I don't think it cancels out scientific reflection. In my view, integrative science and integrative spirituality have to be partners. They have to have mutual respect. But I'm going to talk about 7 elements that I think are very important anytime anyone is involved in a spiritual transformation process. Now, I'm going to present these. These, in my view, are interrelated. So they're not necessarily linear. I could order these in a different way. But I think that each one of us here is struggling with each of these elements at some level. So let me just get started. If one is going to be spiritually transformed, and I'm a person that believes in huge possibilities for spiritual transformation, huge possibilities. One needs a vision of what is possible. And I say, you need a vision of what is possible for your spiritual transformation. That does not mean you may have one. And I'd like to just have you think about why that may be. And you can ask yourself, do I have a vision of what is really possible for my spiritual transformation, for my spiritual attainment? Yes, excuse me. So you need a vision, because if you don't have a vision, you may think that the place you are is the place you have to be. You know, and there are a lot of people who really cannot see beyond sort of the horizon that they're looking out of. And they, in short, they have little hope. So one needs a vision whether one has one or not. And because if you have a vision, then you can strive toward that with whatever energy you can muster and that sort of thing. And the second thing you need is a kind of a diagnosis of what's wrong that's keeping you from moving toward that. Not only may I not have a vision of where I might move, what I might move toward, I may not have a clue about what is happening in me that is stunting my development or slowing me down. If you don't have an assessment of what is wrong, then it's awfully hard to address the problem, right? And so there are a lot of folks that are sort of in a very bad place. They're in a very bad place spiritually, and they haven't been helped by anyone to try to get some sense of, from any mythic perspective, what is wrong. A lot of things can be blocking you, and unfortunately, they're usually very multidimensional and complex. But third, you need, even if you had those two things, you need courage to face what might be possible for you. As I have worked with people over the years, it's become very evident to me that if one is flagging in courage, you will go to denial because it's too overwhelming. But a lot of folks have a tremendous difficulty in having courage. And I thought about this a long time, trying to figure out why don't people have courage. And then it began to be more and more clear to me that there's another element. You have to have energy, or you will not have courage. And so if you don't have energy, and therefore you don't have courage, you won't be able to face either what's possible for you, and you certainly won't be able to face what's wrong. Now, how does one have energy? Here I agree with the great Paul Tillich. I think you get energy through faith. Now, faith, I use this the way that Tillich used it. So you sort of either have it or you don't. It doesn't mean you believe something. It doesn't mean you feel a certain way. It doesn't even mean you will a certain thing. Faith means that, in fact, discernibly, you're hooked up to something that pulls you together, that has juice. You're hooked up to something, we can say this, that mediates juice, I like to say. So there's a kind of a phenomenological thing about faith. That is to say, if you see, everyone has some faith, or they would be dead. All of their systems would be fragmented and quiescent. Faith is that phenomenon of yourself being pulled together. There is something pulling you together against the forces that would try to destroy you. And so it pulls you together and enables you to stand into your life. So it's not a question of do you have faith. By the virtue of the fact that you're sitting here, you have faith. The issue is, how powerful is this? If I really look carefully at myself, is what I'm hooked up to, am I getting enough juice through this, pulling me into integration, that I can resist the fragmenting forces that are coming at me from without and within? So all of us at any particular time are somewhere on a kind of a continuum. You will notice that some days you actually have more faith than others. And it's something you just simply can look at it. Am I being pulled together so that I can step into my life with courage and face my possibilities and face those things which are trying to kill me? Does that make sense? Okay. And one of the things to do when, I always do when I'm teaching people about, spiritual direction or spiritual leadership, is I say, what you do with anyone is you simply try to look and see what the state of faith in this person is. And then you look at what their faith is in. Or in other words, you could put it this way: what is mediating their faith? Because they may think their religion is religion A, and they may have very passionate commitment to this dogma of this religion. But if you look close at them, they may be hooked up and be connected to the juice through a person. It may be coming in through a person. It may be coming in through an image of themselves. You folks that are really wonderful, your faith can actually be in an image of yourself. And the interesting thing is that if you're getting the juice that's pulling you together and enabling you to stand against the destructive forces in your life, it is working somewhat. And I started out by saying there's a way in which all faiths are idolatrous to some degree. See? So even idolatrous faiths are faiths, and because they mediate power. They mediate juice that pulls a person together to some degree or the other. So as you're looking at yourself on the spiritual issue, you can ask yourself, well, how is my faith? Am I accessing energy that's pulling me together so I can step into my life, resist the forces of destruction that are trying to destroy me? What is mediating it to me? Where am I connecting with it? Maybe a woman, maybe a career fantasy. Follow me? But if you look closely, there is some place where you're hooked in, where you're plugged in, I like to say. You're plugged in some way. See? It's very important to look at that. Because a faith can be in something that is really going to disappoint you later. Yeah, see. But the fifth thing is faith, the element of faith, because if you have no faith, even idolatrous faith, you can say it like this: idolatrous faith is better than no faith at all. See, because without faith, then you're in real danger of having your despair kill you. One of the things we all struggle with is despair. And you can tell when your faith is low, your despair is rising. That's a rule. And, despair is not, a lot of people treat despair like it's a backache, chronic back problem or something, sciatica. But unfortunately, despair is not like sciatica. It's like melanoma. If you didn't get anything else, what I'm talking about today than that, that's important to get. Despair is aggressive, like melanoma. And if you are noticing despair in your life, you have got to attend to your faithing ASAP. Because if you don't attend to your faith ASAP, there's a certain finite period of time that you have before that despair will metastasize and take you down. And it has a lot of different forms of taking you down. You could probably each of you write your own book about how despair affects you. Now, our forebears in all these different tribes understood that there was another element in spiritual transformation. And I say our forebears because modern folk have gone real sort of brain dead on this one and begun to act this out unconsciously. and that is sacrifice. Sacrifice is always a part of authentic spiritual transformation. Now, what was it that our ancestors knew? And I don't mean just the Dagara, although they knew it. If you've studied with Martine, you know that the Mayans knew it. Well, the Jews knew it. And the Zoroastrians knew it. And so on. What is it that they knew? Well, there is something great. It wants something from me. If I want the resources I need for life, I'm going to have to offer it what it wants. And if I offer it something worthy, maybe it will return something back to me that will enable me to live. Me and my family, me and my community, me and my village, me and my world. Do you follow that? Now, so that is, I just recently did a seminar on the archetype of sacrifice. And in the course of studying this, doing cross-cultural studies of sacrifice, those are the elements. This sacrifice element, we've now learned, it can be either conscious or unconscious. So, in other words, here's the situation. You will sacrifice, period. I may feel deeply in my bones that there needs to be a sacrifice. And I may well decide it's you that needs to be sacrificed. Human beings have had a long history of that. But we're going to sacrifice you in order that the world continue to work. There's always sacrifice. It's whether you know you're sacrificing or not. You're going to sacrifice. Okay, so that's number 6. Now, if sacrifice is done consciously, it is possible to enter into an ongoing communion with the great primal other, in which the flow between you and it gets to be a sort of beneficent flow. When that flow is established, if you can get into this communion consciously, then a lot of things are possible. That is to say, you will not have an energy shortage. And your courage will be better, and your susceptibility to despair will go way down. And that is when you actually can, it is actually possible for you to experience radiance. This is when what has been called indwelling occurs. This is when what has been called illumination occurs. Some of you have told me that you're very serious about your own realization of the God within you. Our ancestors witnessed that it's usually accompanied by a kind of a new level of love, a new level of peace. You and I could say that then you can have passion, and you can have the kind of passion that you would need if to really care about justice in the world. So those 7 elements, I think, are the last 2: conscious sacrifice, conscious offering, the power of conscious offering, and entering into communion with the primal other, the great other, however your tribe conceives it. those take you to sort of the farther reaches of spiritual realization. And but all of these elements are present. If you study any tradition of spirituality and you look closely, these elements are present. Well, there's this story in the New Testament, and it's about the feeding of the 5,000. And all these folks, these hungry, tired folks that have been following Jesus, it's getting toward nightfall, and they're really tired and they're hungry, and there's not anything for them. You all know this story, most of you do. And when they kind of asked, well, what do we got? Well, we got 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And so Jesus asked that they be brought to him, and he took them and he blessed them, these very imperfect resources. And lo and behold, suddenly there was enough to feed all of these people. And after everyone dined, they picked up all these baskets of things left over. All right. And that's about offering. That's about what happens when you bring an imperfect, fragmentary offering authentically to the Great One. That is, I'm not Roman Catholic, but that's acted out every time the Mass is celebrated. That's why Jung was so fascinated by the transformation symbolism in the Mass. And that's why Jung believed that if you look deeply into the heart of alchemy, you will see an inner sacrifice that is modeled on the Mass in the heart of alchemy. So in any case, offering, and it's not, that's true in Christianity, but it's not just true in Christianity. It is that bringing. See, some traditions thought you had to bring the perfect offering. But that's a little grandiose. You have to bring authentically your fragmented offering. But if you bring it authentically, the Great One can multiply it and give it back to you in a form you can receive and use to fuel your life. So let me stop there and let me just open it up.
I was thinking earlier about energy, and I don't know if this fits in for you, I just want to throw it out there, but for me, inspiration has a lot to do with energy. And that's from a great teacher or a great work of art, or to inspire me to start a spiritual path. Can you say more about that, or you think that's part of
If it's a great teacher, a great work of art, that is what's mediating. That you're having a faith experience in relationship to that. Sure. I mean, see, just repeat again. To the extent that helped you pull yourself together and go forward, you got faith out of it. It was faith. And it's important, I think, spiritually to think consciously about, was it really that painting that did this, or was it something behind the painting? Was it something under the painting? Was it something beyond the painting? Well, but that's what the genius of Mircea Eliade.
Idolatrous faith or idolatry, right?
Yeah, and if you really thought that it was the song that gave you the energy, that's faith. If it's thought about in some sort of simplistic, literal way, it's idolatrous, but it still pulls you together and enables you to go forward.
Like what I call taking the thing you hold.
Yeah, that's right. And so you have to understand, I'm too old to be perfectionistic. So I'm just happy that you have faith, the faith you have, I'm happy that you have the faith you have, because I would rather you have that than be eaten by the dogs of despair. You follow me? Does that make sense? But it is if you want to really grow spiritually, then you have to actually, you know, contrary to a lot of New Age stuff, I mean, you actually do need to think. The mind should not be seen to be the enemy of your spiritual development. The mind can help you reflect upon where you may be depending upon things that are going to really disappoint you cruelly later, and might help you to start trying to go deeper in terms of getting a more solid grounding. Yeah.
Or barriers to coming up with a vision, or even knowing you don't have a vision?
Well, if I had time, what are the blocks of coming up again? Well, from just working with people, the biggest block is your despair. And if I had a lot of time, I would talk a lot more about despair. I'd talk to you a lot more about how do you know how would you recognize your despair? But we all experience despair to some degree, and it's that undertow that you feel in yourself that sort of drags you back and tells you can't go forward, you can't really pull yourself together, you can't really become more powerful spiritually. All that drag, that undertow, and I think you all have experienced that, I mean, to some degree. Yeah, back here in the back.
The safest and the best place to plug in, because I get a sense from what you were saying earlier that there are some dangerous spots and that ultimately it could let you down.
Well, first thing, look, I'm not perfectionistic. First, look at where you're plugged in. Honestly, look at where you're plugged in. Because wherever you're really getting juice, that's your dragon connection. See, that is actually that is actually it. And don't pathologize it first. Appreciate it. Be grateful for it. If you're a musician, and that's what the music is where you plug in. Fantastic. See, what Eliade says is that human beings, they can plug in anywhere, and have. And you study Eliade's work, he describes how people have plugged in everywhere. And so first you see where you're plugged in, you're thankful for that, and then I like to say, then you kind of want to diversify your portfolio. You think about that. You kind of need to diversify that spiritual portfolio a little bit. Because some of these investments may turn out to be really bad. It may be Enron. You get me? You get my drift?
Totally something I've never had ever experienced before. I'm just having complete thought changes as everybody talks. And when you started labeling addiction, for example, most people, when they think they're addicted, think it's a bad thing. You're putting a face on it that actually has a face of survival.
Absolutely.
It gives you a sense of, I
don't
am
think so
somebody.
many people do it.
The people that do it, I think, feel helpless because the word generally thrown about is that you're a bad person because you're addicted. And if you were anybody but an addicted person, you'd be normal. You're putting a face on it that actually makes a person have a sense, I think, of feeling, I'm not so bad, this just isn't the right thing that I need to be doing. You put a better face on it than the faces that are usually thrown around.
When you think spiritually, then everything you look at, you have to see spiritually. Everything. Because it's all spirituality, whether you know it or not. Yeah. And so the crime of an addict is that they need faith. Well, here, as we say in the Mankind Project, I do too. And I'm addicted to some things. And my job is to look at the sort of demonic sacrifices I'm making unconsciously. Because I'll guarantee you, I'm making demonic unconscious sacrifices. And one of my prayers is for help in understanding where that is. Something killing you. In the Mankind Project, one of the, kind of the thing that one of the subtext in working with men is sort of the question: how are you killing yourself? In what way are you destroying your life and relationships? Let's just cut the bullshit and talk about that. Because it's never are you, it is how are you, period. Yeah, back here.
But at first, it wasn't that way. At first, it wasn't that way in most cases. There's an old AA aphorism that says, at first we drank to live, and then we live to drink. It turns. There's a point at which, in many of these, it turns on you.
Yeah,
That's what happens when the God fails you, whatever it is. Yeah, back here in the back.
I have to disagree with you right now. Maybe I have different faith. You see, but the addiction is the false consciousness, a despair appearing as faith. Despair covering up, thinking you have faith. Because eventually, the goal, that addiction that these guys talked about, is going. And I'm thinking from
That is a different view from what I have, yeah. I think that there certainly is despair in it. Absolutely. There's a lot of despair in it. And, but I wouldn't want you to get the idea that there's not despair in your faith. I mean, you got to understand that's an equal opportunity scourge back here.
One of the kind of new age group I ran into, their term for sacrifice, they didn't, the sacrifice kind of gets into cutting animals' heads off and stuff. We don't really do that here. They call it consideration, and it's in kind of a legalistic sense, and that scares people too, because well, that's legalistic and not spiritual, but the legalistic sense of consideration.
There is many versions of sacrifices. There are spiritual tribes. And so all I'm suggesting to you is that you try to think about sacrifice in your life. Think about what sacrifices that you're making unconsciously. And if you were to become more conscious about your fragmented, imperfect offering, how would that look? If you were to become more conscious about offering that imperfect offering. Yeah, back here.
One thing a word that stuck out from what you said in talking about the sacrifice is that, and I guess I'm more familiar with the Christian tribe, and it comes out in Merton a little bit, and I know Joe Campbell talked about if you actually, those who touch the divine, it's more like this, flaming ball of fire which will probably engulf you. But this word that stuck out for me was perhaps. I think, to me, what I see in New Age stuff is that it's like they form a spiritual technology. And if you follow this step, then you get there. But it doesn't always happen.
Well, in sorcery, that's your fantasy. Your fantasy is, if I do this, the other is compelled to do that. And in my view, an authentic attempt to be in communion You know, my responsibility, however poorly I meet it, is in making the most authentic, best offering I can. I'm not in charge of outcomes. You know, you're not grandiose to try to make the most authentic, imperfect, fragmented offering you can make. That's not grandiose at all. That is appropriate, your appropriate contribution. You know, some of you building our ritual space, you may have felt that you weren't as good as some of the other guys and working on this, but you made your offering. You've made as authentic an offering and trying to contribute to the community as you can. You're not in charge of the outcome of the ritual, you know. So when you get kind of being in charge of outcomes, that's grandiosity, you know, in my view. Somebody back here, yeah.
Everything you've talked about so far, the one that grabs me in my guts this morning is we talked about despair and how the less faith, the more despair, and the more despair, the less faith.
Right. And it metastasizes. And it's also contagious.
It's very important to understand that our forebears, our tribal forebears of all these different tribes, they knew it was contagious. And that's why they were so careful about insulation from it. Yeah, go ahead, finish your thought.
My heart is hammering right now, because when I've been looking around the cafeteria at meals, last winter I was in the depths of despair, and I can look back now and realize that, because there was times when I'm realizing I didn't care if I died. I went out for a walk in a snowstorm and sat down and figured I'll just keep sitting here. And a truck was coming in an intersection, and I figured maybe I should just sit here. And I'm looking back right now realizing I was that close to being dead because of the despair. And it scares me to look back and realize how close I was. And when I've been looking around the lunchroom and at meals, I don't know if I'm the only one who sees this, but I've seen a lot of despair in a lot of eyes here this week. And
there's despair in all of them.
Just that because of my life experience in the last year or two that I can see it more clearly, but I see a lot of it here. I feel a lot of it here.
It's very important spiritually to get to where you can see it. Because if you can see it, you can fight it. And I'm gonna stop now. I'm running out of time here. But I would say this. I want to just do I? I want to pluck one more string of fierceness again. Okay? Because one thing that I want you to know about this stuff is that you have to be fierce in the face of despair. So in other words, if you're really flagging right now, and I was your spiritual director, I would be trying to help you pray for juice to fuel your courage so you could actually fight fiercely. See? And that's another thing I wanted to make clear, and that fits with what we were talking about the last time I was talking. Your eye does not have any energy of its own. Period. It may have an image of itself that it elevates to divinity, which temporarily can fuel you, but it's really divine energy you're hijacking through that narcissistic image. You follow me? Your eye really has no energy of its own. And this is, I owe that to Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard understood that the little self cannot establish itself.
and that when the little s self tries to establish itself without the other, the primal other, it is always going to be despair. So you got to have fierceness, but you got to have juice to fuel your fierceness. And if you can identify where the despair is biting you, you know, you got despair bites on you, you know, all of us do. You got to pay attention to where they are and how it's getting into you. And then you've got to really, I just speak, a wise man will pray. A wise man will pray. And you don't have to know the name of the great other. Because even if you did, you'd probably be wrong. So, a couple more, and then we got to stop. Yes. Yes.
I'm interested in hearing what you sacrifice personally and how you learn which sacrifices to make and what your path was in that. Maybe something about sacrifices that you made that were biting off more than you could chew, or mistakes you had to make.
That's right. That's a good. What sacrifices have I made? That's why I emphasize unconscious sacrifice a lot. You know, unconscious grandiosity and unconscious sacrifice. And I have unconsciously sacrificed a lot of my relational life to the grandiosity of my own mind. See? So you might say, I have made an idol out of the magician archetype, you see. And Danny's term, I was talking to Danny, I find his term, the piteous cripple, extremely powerful. Because when it comes to my feelings about my own life, I have been a piteous cripple in my relationality, and still am in some ways. And I said to Danny, you know, I'm probably going to die a piteous cripple in my relationality compared to what I know was possible for a human being. So I have made enormous, horrific, unconscious sacrifices that I cannot get back. You know what I mean? You know. And so when you talk about grief, I have a lot of grief about that. One more.
Earlier you were talking about sacrifice, and I felt this jolt, and I realized that I had sacrificed my music over the last decade, pretty much to my family. And then I thought a little bit longer, and I realized it was fairly conscious, so I'm grateful for that. It was a fairly deliberate thing. But the kids are growing up. I just sent my daughter away, and it's time to reclaim that. And I'm interested in, you know, you just said something about you can't get these things back, but
you can't get those things
what's
back.
the dynamic of I have to find something else to offer, I suppose.
Your authentic offering is what you have now. And I really do believe, you know, I believe in miracles. I really believe in miracles. I believe that life is miraculous, you know. I mean, the Great One has done miraculous things with me. And in terms of sacrifice, I pray to know what to sacrifice, you know, and to try to make an offering of what time I have left and what resources I have.
How do you feel about the sacrifice of a lamb? How do you feel about the sacrifice of a lamb?
What I feel about the sacrifice of a lamb. any act can be undertaken from all kinds of points of view and understandings, you know. So you can't tell about the authenticity of a sacrificial act from the outside. You know, I mean, it's true. You can't tell, and because this is where this inner temple. If I had longer to talk, I'd talk about the importance of your trying to consciously to create your inner temple, where it's where the challenge is for you to be able to really attain authenticity in your capacity to offer. And if that lamb is utilized in some way that is extremely authentic, you know, it could be a very powerful, genuine spiritual act, but it also could be an act of sorcery, and in which I'm trying to manipulate the divine. So you couldn't watch me from the outside and tell what it really was. Okay, I've got to stop. Huh?
Can't stop until 10:30. It's only 10:20.
So anyway, I hope you're thinking. I hope you're thinking about how this relates. You see, if I'm speaking as a psychoanalyst, you see, I am trying to deal with what presents in the psyche, and many of these same realities present, and they can be talked about in scientific language. But in my personal view, unless you can open up the brackets and face the possibility that great thing in you actually might be God. I mean, and the fact that you don't know anything about the great other, or that you don't know anything about anything divine, does not change one whit the fact that great thing in you is God. And the only thing is that your ego can channel that energy in a way that makes it hell energy. So as I agree again, I mean, I have Paul Tillich sitting here by me in this chair. I mean, somebody that I deeply admire. And he would tell us all that all the energy is divine. It's even divine when we hijack it and make it monstrous. It's still divine energy, but we have done an evil alchemy with our egos. So anyway, one more. Yeah, let's get started.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Me? My question is, let's say if you're not sure where you're plugged in, or maybe you're plugging into different places all the time, you have no solid connection anywhere, but you're always plugging into something different because you're always plugged into something.
Yeah.
Is it possible to still have some sort of communion when you're not sure where you're plugged in, or you're constantly plugging into something different?
Well, you're in a kind of communion. You're in a kind of communion. But we're talking about spiritual development here, right? And so the goal would be to try to get more conscious about that, more intentional about that communion, and to realize that all those different things you're plugging into, you gotta see that there's a capital S source behind all those places you're plugging in.
Plugging in the same thing, just in different places?
My understanding is that any real juice you're getting is coming from a very primordial source. And it's kind of important I believe it's very important to think about that consciously, because if you don't think about that consciously, then you can be awfully confused about the way, the particular source you're getting it out of, and you can be real misled about the dependability of that source, back here.
Abraham, Isaac scenario.
Yeah, I think if you try to you could talk about that as a remnant of human sacrifice, if you wanted to. Some people do. But if you were to try to take some kind of, mythic meaning out of that instead of simply a historical phenomenon of human sacrifice, if you were to try to look at that mythologically, it would be a modeling of the seriousness with which one's intentionality has to be brought to one's offering. It would be a sort of a teaching story about intentionality, about the intention of bringing one's best offering to the great other. And excuse me. Yeah. It's presented as a kind of a test in that sense, yeah, I think that's the mythic meaning, I think, of the story. We all have got something that we don't want to offer. See, and it probably is an idol. See, and so moderns have a kind of a fantasy. If I offer, I will have less. Less. That moderns have the sort of a scarcity fantasy. If I offer, I will have less. When our forebears knew the only way I will have what I need, and in fact in abundance, is if I offer with authenticity and with authentic intention. And I just would add simply, it doesn't have to be something shining and perfect. It just needs to be the best you have, right? Thank you very much. That's it.
Discover your true masculine power through the king, warrior, magician, and lover archetypes, energies that have defined strong men for millennia. In just 5 minutes, this free test reveals which of your masculine energies are in balance and which need work. The result? Clear direction for your personal development and masculine empowerment. Thousands of men have gained insights to reshape their lives. Why not you? Take the Masculine Energy Indicator test now at masculinetest.com.